Today, I'm sitting down with the Azrai as a cast member on the Realms Park podcast, as well as an active member of the Larp community. Azrai and I had no shortage of things to cover. We talk about playing D&D with ADHD, creating characters for Larp as well as tabletop games, and finally, getting into Larp in the first place, how to do it, and where to start. Without further ado, sit back and relax. You're listening to Roll for Insight. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Roll for Insight, the Azrai. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, we have a tradition here on Roll for Insight, something we always ask. Azrai, what is your D&D pet peeve? It's not something that's going to break up a friendship or a group, but it's just something that makes you go, why'd you do that?
Yeah, it's so funny because I had to think about this one because when you have ADHD that is like very severe or possibly ASD, you spend so much time talking in terms of like what's a deal breaker, like what is the minimum that I need to show up and have it not be unbearable. That it's like, who has time for pet peeves? I'm just trying to survive. But I think one thing that I know, because I experience it in LARP as well, so it's probably kind of universal, is when there's a sort of min-maxer, very rules lawyery player. There's nothing wrong with playing like that. In fact, when you go to those people for help, incredible. But when they don't necessarily factor in that the person they're talking to is not like that, and so it's constantly giving them helpful advice or tips or trying to rewrite their character, their character stats and stuff. That sort of thing. Not a deal breaker, but very much like, please, sir, I just let my character be a little dumb.
It can get to a deal breaker if they're constantly like, because D&D, you need to be focused enough to play the game. And if they're interrupting to like stop the game to argue about a rule, I mean, it can completely, like, your pace will halt like a train with no tracks.
That's true.
Gone forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that can absolutely...
It can definitely get to that point. And at that point, it's like, it's not just about that. It's sort of about consideration for others in general. There's definitely a time where you're like, okay, maybe this is like less of an isolated thing and more of a personality trait.
This might be a problem. Maybe we should be friends. But speaking of, you mentioned ADHD, and you have a great video talking about D&D and ADHD. And it spoke to a lot of people. It had some very positive reception in the comments and the likes and the all that. It was really good to see.
I was quite surprised. Yeah. Usually, when people talk about these things, you expect some backlash from people who are not very excited for their culture and community to change. And I received a surprisingly small amount of that. I've gotten it a little bit more in the past, but for some reason, it's just sort of flew under the radar, even though it was a little sassy.
Yeah, it was.
In the video. So, yeah.
Hey, if there's a problem, I think you have full rights to be sassy about it, at least a little bit, makes it a little fun. But one thing that you talked about was that D&D, just the nature of a game that takes place in your head with tons of invisible information, it can be very hostile to people who have problems visualizing that and like keeping that in their heads. So to you talked a lot about things that DMs and groups can do, but to what degree do you think that the company Wizards of the Coast, the people that make this game, what degree do you think that they should try to change the game and the system to try to help people who might have more of an issue with playing with all of this invisible, unseen information?
That's a really good question, because you don't often think about speaking to bigger companies directly. We're so used to community care, sort of on an interpersonal level. Something that I have just been doing personally for my own game is making more digital paper props. So like I made a version of the D&D calendar of Harp's, I think that's what it's called. I made the calendar, but I still can't pronounce it. I made that recently. And I know there are some versions available that you can download, but it almost needs to be on an infographic level sometimes. So making things like that, having maybe a visual learner's packet, making things like, if you have lore, you could make a beautiful aged paper prop of a page from this book and have like illustrations and things like that. And it doesn't have to be like, obviously everything doesn't need to be like that, but having more that you can just look at as part of the materials that you get when you want to play a game, that'd be great.
Yeah, they work a lot with artists to create a visual medium for their books. Like they have plenty of pretty pictures, but I find that not a lot of that stuff, like you can use pretty pictures in your game, but I mean, the thing that you really need, I mean, you need maps, you need like minis, and I don't think that they provide a lot of cheap alternatives to buying those extremely expensive like 3D miniatures. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't really encountered any. I love minis, but especially with so many people playing digitally now, and I think you really, even once the pandemic is a less pervasive, I think it would be great to still account for digital play, because it's so much more accessible to all kinds of people, and it means you can play with anyone in the world, really. So I think it's just a good move in general, and having digital materials like that can integrate with a digital game is a very good idea. Like even if you had almost like paper doll style things where you can build your own, two-dimensional little paper dolls of NPCs and things like that, so that people can put figures and faces to names and things that they're battling on a screen.
I've always felt that they don't utilize. I mean, so much of D&D is built by community members. Like you got community members like Say and Peku making these super beautiful maps, or Griffin Saddleback making hundreds of items for D&D. And I don't think Wizards of the Coast really takes advantage of that enough. I mean, plugging these people so more people find them, I think could also be really good.
Yeah.
But
and I think there are so many artists and craftspeople who make things like a spell tracker that almost looks like a tiny abacus, maybe featuring things like that or affiliating with those people somehow. It's like, hey, if you need physical stuff as well, here's a page where we feature people who do that.
Yeah, that would be so good.
Yeah.
It'd also just be good for smaller creators, because like Griffin Saddleback is pretty big, but there are so many people that make similar content that just don't. They go completely under the radar, and the content that they make is completely not thrown out, but it doesn't get as much attention as sometimes they deserve. So it would be good to see.
Yeah, it's the Wild West out there on the internet. The more we can help each other, the better.
Yeah, it's hard to get noticed. But I mean, you mentioned earlier that you find that playing digitally, like a lot of people start playing digitally because of the pandemic. But a lot of those same people find that playing digitally, has so many perks. I mean, have you preferred playing online as opposed to in person? Because that's been my experience. I love it.
I've only played in person a little bit, and there are definitely pros and cons. I love being able to see people's faces and body language in real time. That sort of helps me role play a little better, and even just on a basic level, it's much easier to tell when you maybe interrupting somebody or taking up space where someone else was trying to say something, if you can like look at them and read them physically. But playing D&D, you're sitting in one spot for so many hours. If you need to pause to go to the bathroom, or if you need to set up your space somewhere that's more comfortable, it's so much easier to do that digitally. Like you disrupt so much less, and you can just mute yourself if you need to eat, things like that. I love a lot about playing digitally.
Some of my players need to learn about muting themselves while they eat. I will never forget the crinkling of the potato chip bag. I mean, you've played a lot of D&D games online at this point. I mean, we mentioned before the show that Realms is already like 30, 40 episodes. It's a lot of episodes in at this point. It's a solid series, and you guys are like a year ahead, so you have a lot of experience. With playing online. However, of course, there are struggles people have mentioned, connection, being able to role play across screens. I mean, how have you tried to overcome that as a player? I mean, you're not running the game, but still, you have a little bit of responsibility for keeping the flow going. So how have you tried to overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I think that just sort of calls for more communication between players. I think having time where you can talk about what your character is thinking and feeling when not in a session or when you're out of game, or even just like, if you have a day off where all the players meet and just talk about stuff, it's makes it a lot easier to sort of act on this information that you might not be able to pick up as easily digitally if people just talk about what their characters are going through. Then you can hold it, keep that in mind while you role play. And then I find that that's helped me a lot, especially, in general, as a person who's very neurodivergent, sometimes I will misinterpret things anyway. So when people can directly communicate what they want from a session, what they want from an encounter, what is weighing on their character, that's so helpful for me.
Do you guys have, I'm curious, does your group do like session, we all, or at least I hope most D&D groups do a session 0 to like establish, here's what the players want, here's what the DM wants, here's the expectation, here's how you make characters, stuff like that. Do you guys have like sessions in between each to like discuss what happened and like what you want to happen in the future?
We do. We are figuring out more of a solid schedule for things like that recently, but we have sort of figured that at least one of the days that we designate for game days could actually just be a hangout day where we talk about these things. And now I think we're going to move to every other Sunday instead of just one per month, because we are so far ahead in play sessions as opposed to published ones that we have that time. So we are going to do that. And I came into Realms Apart later than everyone else, so I wasn't there for the session 0 of the game, but I think that session 0 is sort of like the starting point for an ongoing conversation. It's really important to keep updated on what players want, and as a player, what your DM is trying to communicate and what makes them have fun as well. So definitely it's a process, an ongoing conversation.
As someone who is neurodivergent, when you're doing your session 0, what do you make sure to inform your DM of? Because making sure that all of the stuff is out there is really important, but some people can't articulate it, like, it's hard. It really is. So like, what do you make sure to point out? What's your checklist?
I have not played many different kinds of D&D games. I've played this one obviously for a while now, but the variety, not my biggest experience pool. So that for me, it has been an ongoing process, learning what I need. It's so just open communication the whole time. But definitely things that I say first is that I need I need space to think. I cannot hear information and process it at the same time. So there sort of needs to be like a information delivery, time to digest, and then more information possibly. So that is very important, especially when it's all or at least mostly audio. And that's something that can be awkward, because if there is a silence, there's an urge to fill a silence, right? So it's about finding a way to have that space without it just being awkward, like dead space in the game. So that's definitely a thing. It will take me a long time, if ever, to fully get the hang of rules and like what exactly I need to know to play the game. So I need to streamline and simplify my character builds as much as possible. And along with that is telling people that it's not because I'm not paying attention or because I don't care. It's just because that information falls out of my head like sand in a colander, So honestly, if I can make sure that information can sit in my brain long enough for me to process it, and that people are not going to be resentful or snarky when I make rule or math mistakes, then I'm good. Like, my checklist is, because bare minimum is kind of short.
Yeah, totally understandable. You mentioned that it helps you to streamline your character. Do you think that players, I mean, I find that that's very interesting because often when people say like streamline their character, they're theory crafting, they're making all these builds. That's not something that I thought would. That's not something that initially popped into my mind as something that would be super helpful. So, I mean, has it helped you to like map out what your character does, like in combat and all of the talents and skills that they have? Has that helped you to better play the game and fit it into your mindset?
Yeah. Well, and when I say streamline, it's partly of like whether it's through practice or whatever, getting a hang of what my character can do, and partly making sure that it's all very simple. Like Cal in Realms Apart, he's a fighter. I purposefully made him not at all a magical boy, or even a healer. He has one marketable skill, and once I got the hang of that, I felt like, all right, maybe we can talk about more abilities and feats and stuff. But starting very simply so that it's like I know if I'm going into an encounter, there are like 3 or 4 options for me. And I don't have to keep track of spell slots or anything like that. And that has actually been incredible as far as having any foothold to where I might be able to build on it later and do something more complicated. And my DM Knox, he just completely built that character for me as far as stats and everything. So he just showed up and said, "Here's your stuff. This is what it does," and it was just a matter of time getting the hang of it.
Do you want to eventually? I mean, honestly, like a lot of my players, I very much assist them with building up their stats and getting all their and choosing what spells to do. Like they'll ask me, "Hey, Crispy,
bless you for that.
Yeah, is this spell good? Is this good?" Because I mean, there's so much. It doesn't help that I use everything, so there's a lot for them to choose from. So I try to help them as much as I can, because if I can use everything, it should only be fair that they can too. But do you have a desire? Do you have a desire to eventually kind of, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to continue having your DMs help, because I mean, honestly, you build a character, what, twice, maybe thrice a campaign. It doesn't happen that often. But do you want to eventually have that, that the talent, or not the talent, but the ability to like learn and create your own characters? Because a lot of people create 10, 15, 20 characters and have them all stacked up on like a file cabinet.
Right. Yeah, I am slowly getting to a place where I have more input that I feel comfortable giving. I don't know. I focus so much on who the character is and the story of them, and all stats and mechanics that I will ever want will purely be to facilitate that or to support that. So to whatever extent it's relevant to that, yeah, I do. I would like to be able to at least give somebody a skeleton, and say, how is this? Is this very cursed? What do we need to do to make it workable?
I always say that players should give their DM, if they don't know how to make a character, like first time player, just give me a concept. Like, give me what you want. Like, do you want to be Legolas? Do you want to be...
that's good.
Do you want to be Aragorn? I'm trying to think of a character that's not from Lord of the Rings. I just watched the movie. Give me a break.
Don't even bother then. We can talk Lord of the Rings metaphors. I'm good.
There's no other room in my brain. But I mean, if you want to have a character that's a specific concept, just give that to me, and then we can work together and find something to make that work. Unless the concept is, I want to be the most powerful person ever and overshadow the rest of the party. In which case, you should probably find a concept.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. It's a very, I say accessible, but I don't even mean in like a neurodivergent way. I just mean accessible to even people who don't ever play D&D. That's a accessible way to approach it. And that is essentially how Cal got built with my DM. I just told him, listen, pirate, a little sneaky, a little chaotic, but he fights. Like that's his that's his thing.
Speaking of accessibility, one last piece of advice for people who are neurodivergent or who are just nervous about getting into D&D. Do you have any advice or word of encouragement, like of how you got into the game and started this huge, like, multi-year journey in your own game?
Well, I have a really great group of friends, and I've known them for so long, and it did actually take me a while to find the right group of people. Nobody in there has ever made me feel like stupid, which, may sound pretty basic, but when you live with a different brain type that people don't understand, it's like a sort of white noise of your existence sometimes. But no one in there has ever made me feel like my brain type is a character flaw, or, from a lack of aptitude even on my part. Like, even when I tell them I cannot do math, I don't feel like they see me as less smart. So I think that starting out with a group of people, whatever your styles of play are, you can communicate and find a good way to collaborate on that. But finding people that you trust with, your brain issues, your accessibility issues. I mean, just period. It's a lot harder to communicate accessibility to people that you don't already have that with than it is to adjust play styles with people that you do have that with, I think.
So you got your channel. I mean, you started off as Larp House. You did tons of stuff about immersive, real life role play experiences. And apparently, we need to define what Larp is, because during the Momo episode, people didn't know. So, what is Larp?
So if you're asking me for a definition, sort of Larp now, I mean, my experience of it has broadened so much since I made that first video in 2016. But LARP stands for Live Action Role Play, and I would say that it's any game, any experience where you are pretending to be somewhere or someone that you are not, for entertainment or education even. That encompasses escape rooms and even some theme parks, like the Star Wars theme park sections of Disney World. You have a character, you have a profile, the cast members are in character. I would say that counts. And there are digital online only LARPs where most of it is happening on your computer screen. I think those count as well. So really, adult games of pretend.
Now this factors into D&D as well, but for these LARPs, I mean, people who come to them, a lot of the time you create very interesting and expansive characters, and you do that for D&D as well. And everyone has a different process. Like I always ask this, but everyone has a different process for how they create their characters. So for you, what are the most important steps that you take to making an interesting character, whether it be for a LARP or for D&D? And I am curious, do the steps change depending on which you're doing?
Oh, well, it hasn't so much so far. And even when I make characters for storylines, things like TikTok, which I would also consider LARPing, by the way, it's pretty similar for me. And I have a feeling that it's very rooted in, again, neurodivergence, hyperfixations, that sort of thing. I look at characters that I already love, look at what things that I love about them, and I just put those things in a blender a lot of the time. And for role-playing games, especially, it's I think that's perfectly adequate. I don't think that you have to sit and try to come up with a completely original, never before seen sort of character type. Because when you play a character, you're right.
Never will.
all work is derivative, right? The thing with role-playing is that by the time you get almost any playing under your belt, any experiences, any character dynamics and relationships, that character is going to change. And if not very soon after you create them, then certainly by the end, you are going to have a very distinct character that's different from the inspirations you started with. Like Cal is very clearly inspired by Jim Hawkins. I'm not shy about that. He's Jim Hawkins and with a lot of social anxiety. And thing is, he's already gone through so much that I guess I can't say just yet that gives him distinct, very different motivations. So as much as he is like Jim, even in the beginning, he's changed a lot now. So the answer to creating a unique character is to just play what you like and then let stuff happen to them. They'll get unique.
I mean, if you take a character like Hawkins or you take a character like Daenerys and transpose them into D&D, they're already a new character. I mean, they are not the same anymore. As long as you're not like completely copying their complete backstory or quoting their lines, I mean, you essentially have a different character already.
Yeah, I think so. One of the LARP characters that I played for longest, Petra, is very, very clearly just a mashup of Peter Pan and Finn from Adventure Time. Maybe a little Dory from Finding Nemo. But by the end of her journey, I think those influences kind of, I mean, they got put in a blender with years of things happening. A distinct personality.
I'm curious, was that your first ever LARP character?
Yeah.
That's funny because my first ever NPC I ever made for D&D was also named Petra.
Really? I think it's such a cool name.
It's such a good name. I mean, it ended up, I don't know why, but I changed her name 4 times in the same campaign, and I just made it part of her character that she always changes her name.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But yeah, that's a funny little coincidence there. Like, point is, I mean, when you're creating these characters, a lot of people struggle with getting their character to fit with the rest of the group, whether it is the community that has built up around the LARP game that you're playing, because each LARP game, it's different people there. It's never the same.
Yeah.
Or even if you're playing with a D&D group that you meet up with every week, it's sometimes hard to get your character to fit in or to just fit into some kind of dynamic. Maybe not even like fit into like a cohesive dynamic, but just any dynamic at all. It's hard. Do you have any advice for people who want to get their character in there?
Yeah. Well, I ask always, every time I join a game, I ask what skill set is needed. I have my preferences usually, but I'm not closed off to adapting. Like if the group did not have a healer, I would have taken something like that on and justified it somehow, just to be useful in the most utilitarian sense. But the thing about group dynamics is that you sort of adding another person, no matter what, changes a dynamic. So if there's a person who's really outgoing, and so you think you might want to be a little more secretive, you coming in, just being a living thing that is a stranger, might make them less outgoing. So then you might want to balance the other way for that. I found that my initial instinct with Cal was to come in and be very, very secretive, very not necessarily willing to talk about himself at all. And that's still pretty true. But I found quickly that there were other characters that out of game love having secrets. They love playing these mysterious sort of dark, brooding archetypes. And that's great. And so I just ended up justifying maybe Cal is a different kind of quiet. Maybe he doesn't need to have that archetype. Maybe he tries to manage, like delegate people, maybe he wants to be helpful because he has this social anxiety. And so maybe it just manifests in a way that is not the same thing, the same trait in multiple characters, like 3 different times. If that makes sense. Pardon me, I'm getting a little rambly.
No, that's good. But when you mentioned that Cal has social anxiety, but I mean, I'm curious, do you find that you are more outgoing or more introverted during D&D games? Because even if you're introverted or extra or whatever during real life, the dynamic can change in a more nerdy, isolated setting. So what do you like when you play?
Yes. Well, I find that, especially because it's with my friends, I can definitely be more outgoing. I started off quite a bit more timid in the game, and that read very much as what Cal was going through, and that's fine. For me, it does completely depend on who I'm playing with. But I don't find it difficult to be extroverted and outgoing. It just it takes energy, and sometimes I'm just tired. So it's not an anxiety thing for me. It's just what gives me energy and what drains it is different, I think.
Yeah, but for people who can get drained with D&D, because honestly, D&D can be at times very mentally tiring. But for those people, I mean, do you have any advice for them for, I mean, maybe regaining that mental energy or utilizing it in a way that allows them to be more outgoing when they play, or perhaps less outgoing if they end up steamrolling their other group mates? Do you have any advice for that balance?
Right. Well, I think if you're trying to be more outgoing, and if that's difficult for you as a person, I think step one for all of these things, I'm probably always going to say, is communication with your party. It's going to be a lot easier if people know that you are trying to step out of your comfort zone a little bit. They can maybe be mindful to give you a little more space to talk, so that you don't have to try to push against something that has no idea what you want. So that is important. What helps me feel a little bit less like I'm just wandering in the dark is I consume a lot of media that reminds me of not just my own character, but our group dynamic. And it sort of helps me look at situations that we might go through and maybe even conceptualize how I might act in that situation. So it's not always just maybe dead inspiration. I just look at other examples. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
I've been rewatching Community recently, which is I love the show. It's so funny. But Community, and there are other shows like it, but Community is a really interesting example of a lot of extremely different personality types and how they clash and interact, and it's quite funny. And obviously it's a show, it's all scripted and everything, but it sort of at least gives you a little bit of inspiration for a direction in situations, if that
taking inspiration from fiction for your real life interaction. I mean, it's a really healthy way. Well, I mean, don't take negative inspiration, but it can be a healthy way for you to use your nerdier outlets to translate into real life conversation.
Yeah, and I think even just the bare minimum feeling of maybe not even confidence, but a little bit of this isn't completely unfamiliar to me. Just a little bit of preparedness makes a lot of difference as well, even if the situations end up being completely different.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. But I mean, we got a little bit away from LARP here, but that's
sorry.
No, that totally is okay because this is a D&D channel. Anyway, so
right.
But this is a rambly show. I mean, on the Quick Crab episode, we talked about Red Dead Redemption 2 and StarCraft for 20 minutes and then realized that the episode was an hour long. So, things happen.
I mean, that's the great thing about making your own content. I guess you get to be the boss of that.
But back to LARP just real quick. I mean, a lot of people, LARP is more intimidating than D&D because it's usually bigger groups of people. It, at least to some, feels more elaborate and often is more elaborate. So some people struggle with getting into LARP and just starting out with their first ever live action roleplay game. So do you have any advice for people who might be more nervous or just haven't started out yet for getting into LARP and playing with their first experience?
I mean, always. Well, first of all, every single person there has the same worries. Everybody wonders if they're going to be good enough or if other people are going to think that they've role played well or that their costume looks good. I've seen people who've been LARPing for all their lives, which I did not even know that LARP had been around long enough for people to have LARPed all their lives. But they worry about the same thing. And it's sort of like most personal insecurities in that regard. You definitely worry about it more than anyone around you does. And everybody is there for the same thing. They all want to play pretend, whatever genre. So you're a team, really. When you show up at a LARP, you're joining a team, even if in character these people hate each other. You're all there to do the same thing. And there are different communities. The culture is very different. So if you are worried about not fitting in, then you can just go to another, It's just about finding the right community. Bring a buddy if you want. Finding a place where you will fit in is not nearly as hard as you might think. There are LARPs that take place in modern day, so you don't have to buy costumes. There are LARPs that take place pretty much virtually by nature, like if some sort of a urban fantasy thing. So you can eliminate physically going and meeting a bunch of strangers because that can be scary. There will be something for you.
Yeah, that's really important. But we have been going on for 40 minutes now, so I believe it is time. Yeah, you can lose track very quickly, but I believe it is time to wrap up this episode. All that's left to do. Azrai, what have you got going on this week?
Well, I have spent the past 6 or 9 months or so learning about perfumery and fragrance. Specifically because I am making sort of themed scents for role-playing purposes. And I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. I don't have anything to plug, but I am just experimenting like a mad Victorian scientist with this stuff. So that's what I'm doing.
I've recently gotten into these candles that are scented for dungeons and locations in D&D, and I may or may
Love
not.
Those.
I'm going to light them for my next game. I'm so excited. But
where did you get them from?
I think I got them from Etsy.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. I mean, small creators from Etsy. Sometimes that's the best stuff.
Yeah, I was buying components for my Red Dead Redemption costume, and I was like, candles. This is a worthwhile purchase with my meager income. But anyway. Thank you so much for
thank you for having me.
Show. Yes, of course. But if you guys enjoyed this episode of Roll for Insight, you want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to subscribe to Crispy's Tavern, please do if you're so inclined, and also follow on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And finally, if you want to leave your own thoughts or tips or whatever, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment thinking different to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. We'll both see you all next time. Farewell.